diagnosis can feel like such an impossibility. Today I want to talk about something that has been on my mind for a while, and I have been gathering my thoughts on this for so long that I'm hoping it's not going to be all over the place, because I've sat down and basically sort of vlogged this in my head a half dozen times at least. Here we go. I'm finally actually sitting down with a camera and we're going to see how this unfolds. I started thinking about this a long time before I got my diagnosis and before I knew that I was autistic. And I've said before that I suspected for a long time that maybe I was on the spectrum, but I didn't ever really expect to get a diagnosis. That kept me from talking about a lot of things that I would have liked to talk about earlier, but I didn't really feel like I was in a position where I could talk about them. And I was always really conscious that I was seen as a mom of kids who were autistic. I felt like that brought down a good amount of hostility from some corners, no matter what I did or what I said. And I was really conscious of that. It was one of the reasons that I didn't talk about my suspicion that I was autistic for a long time. Self-diagnosis is completely valid. I don't really feel like it's very likely that people are going to go and look up the DSM criteria for autism and like they're going to go through it and realize that it applies to themselves unless they're actually autistic. I don't think that neurotypical people tend to wonder if they're autistic. I don't know. Maybe sometimes that happens, but most of the people that I've known who wonder if they're autistic end up actually being autistic, in my experience. But at the same time, one of the things that totally held me back while being very open about other parts of my life was that I'd seen so much hostility towards parents, and I completely understand where that comes from, because I've had bad experiences myself, specifically often moms, but sometimes dads, who have that cure mentality, who send me horrible messages, who leave horrible comments. Sometimes it's more frequent and sometimes it doesn't happen for a really long time. And then some days I get 5 messages. I have really strict comment moderation on with certain words and even misspelled words, because sometimes people misspell words intentionally to try to get through certain types of comment moderation. So I have some really strict flags and comment moderation on my comments around certain topics that people like to come on and shoot their mouths off about my kids and now me. I've made 2 videos out of 600 videos that even mention vaccines, but I'll now and then get hit by the vaccine people who want to tell me how me and my kids are broken and damaged and cuss me out and then tell me I'm rude if I respond to them. So I can understand that hostility, but at the same time, as a parent who didn't have a diagnosis and who wasn't sure I would ever get a diagnosis, I sort of felt like a lot of times I would be swept up into that category because advocating for my children was important to me. I felt like that got me swept up and lumped with these other parents who believe radically different things from what I believe. And I don't know, it just felt gross. In many ways, it made me feel very cut off from the adult autistic community, just because I was a parent of kids who are autistic and I didn't have a diagnosis myself. And so often all that I would hear when I was in those groups and just sort of hanging out quietly was so negative about parents of kids that I was really afraid to say anything. And so for a long time, I just listened. And I think one of the other hardest parts is realizing that a lot of times in certain groups, the most radical voices are the hardest. And I think this is true both with the martyr sort of autism moms and also in the autistic community. There is a certain group that is very hard and fast, only this, we all believe this. And that's not necessarily true, but I have seen in certain groups where anyone who doesn't follow a certain line of thinking just gets shut down and muted. And this is other autistic people. I don't like this whole think that we all have to think the exact same thing. And if we don't agree, we either get, and not even getting upset just if we don't have this party line down, we're either getting muted or the thread is closed because we can only say the same thing. Like that's, and they aren't even on heated topics. I don't know. As I've always said, I think it's really, really important to listen to autistic voices. But I don't find myself saying that they're the only voices that I think are important. I still love a lot of vlogs and blogs and pages that are run by neurotypical parents who are extremely valuable parts of the community. I have learned so much over the years from parents who are allies of the autistic community. And while I understand the damage that's been done by the warrior and martyr parent, and I encounter it on a regular basis, I also sometimes feel like we don't reaffirm the good that's done by those other people, by the allies in the movement often enough. I think because when something mean is said, we feel it so much more sometimes than the things that are done that are nice and good and uplifting. Those things are so much easier to dwell on. It gets brought up a lot more. The cure stuff, the dangerous things that people do to try to cure their children. And I mean, absolutely, that stuff needs to be stopped. But I also want to make sure not to push away neurotypical allies in the process. With the way diagnosis is, especially in women, who knows how many people are having that same experience, wondering, but not in a position to get a diagnosis, but having that strong identification with their autistic child where they do kind of feel like they're probably autistic too. A diagnosis can feel like such an impossibility. I'm sorry if that was just jumbled. It's just sometimes that divide for me, both as a parent of kids who are autistic and an autistic person, sometimes that divide just feels really painful. I have friends on both sides of it, and that are all good people that don't just fall to that net of warrior, martyr, mama. And I appreciate all of you here so very much. I cannot even begin to say how much I have learned through the comment section here, through conversations with you, and even when I don't have the spoons to comment back because I get really, really anxious sometimes. Tell when my anxiety is lower, I am so much better at commenting back than when it's higher. I am always reading all of your comments and I appreciate them so much. That is it for today. If you like this video, I would appreciate it so much if you'd give it a thumbs up, and if you're interested in all things autism, I'd love it if you'd hit subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.